My great-grandfather was actually at Bentonville. He was with Sherman. Made the march down to Atlanta, made the march to the sea, was one of the first occupiers into Savannah. He marched in the Grand Review on the second day in Washington, D.C. I'm a little bit proud of that.
My name is Bruce Frail. I'm the chairman of the Marketing Promotions Committee for the SUVCW. And this is past Commander-in-Chief's video biography series. And the past Commander-in-Chief that I am interviewing today is Mark Day. Mark, could you introduce yourself and give us some personal information about you?
Well, as you said, I'm Mark Ronald Day. I was Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War from August of 2017 to August of 2018. I was the 136th Commander-in-Chief of that organization. Proud to have been that. I'm 68 years old. I was born in Rhinebeck, New York, on the 28th of May, in a year I won't tell you. You can figure it out from the age. My mother was Henrietta Martha Coons. My father was Ronald Augustus Day. My father and mother were both born there in that area of New York, which is Dutchess County. County seat is Poughkeepsie. Town that I grew up in is called Red Hook. It's about 5 miles north of where the hospital is in Rhinebeck. And I lived there in that little town till I turned 19 years old. And then at the age of 19, I decided I'd like to see something different than what I was experiencing there. And so I joined the United States Navy and served in the Navy for 24 years, rising to the rank of Master Chief Operations Specialist, pay grade E9. Retired in 1995 and became a school teacher in Bedford County, Virginia, a job I enjoyed doing for 22 years. Retired from that 3 years ago. Have been enjoying my retirement. I retired the same year that I became Commander-in-Chief. That was really the only way I felt that I could adequately fulfill the duties. I didn't feel I could do what I needed to do and still remain working. My hobbies, model railroading. They've got a 14-foot by 23-foot room in my basement, a model in N scale, which is 1:160, what I call the Bedford Branch Norfolk and Western Railroad. And as obviously the name indicates, I operate Norfolk and Western operating equipment from the time frame of the 1950s through the 1970s. It's a freelance thing, and I actually have a web page for it. There's a Facebook page for it. If anybody wants to see it, go to Bedford Branch Railroad and on Facebook, and there it is. My other hobbies, my other main hobby is reenacting. I've been a reenactor 17, 18 years. Of course, I couldn't do it when I was in the Navy, but when I got out and became a school teacher, I met up with some people and found that I liked reenacting. First thing I reenacted was the Revolutionary War, and I did that and still do that. Found a group of men here locally in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I live now. And we created the 105th Pennsylvania Wildcats here in Lynchburg. We had a good group with that. I reenacted with the 87th Pennsylvania. I've reenacted with the 63rd New York. I've done some other things, and I also was a member here in Lynchburg of the 11th Virginia Company G, Confederate States of America. So, yeah, I was a galvanizer. I would go both ways. The Lynchburg group portrayed both Union and Confederates, depending on what the need was.
So what era was your train track? What year are you based in?
Well, as I said, I believe 1950s to 1970s. So I operate everything from steam, the Class J's. I have Malays. I have the Ys. I don't have any A's. Those are the three engines, steam engines that were prominent in the Norfolk and Western. Operate some early GPs, operate some Alcos, RS3s, Deep 7s, Deep 9s, SD9s, all the way up to, say, something as new as a GP35 or a 40-2. I mean, there's a wide variety of equipment. And of course, as far as rolling stock, anything that was available, anything that's East Coast, pretty much, so Norfolk Western, Southern, West Virginia, the Pennsylvania, obviously, seaboard coastlines, anything that was operating, FP&E, Potomac and Richmond, up here. A lot of different kinds of equipment. But I try to remain true to that up to the 70s. I don't operate anything on my layout beyond 1970s. I do have a collection of modern equipment too. I belong to a railroad club, the Lynchburg N-Scale Club, and we operate some more modern trains sometimes, and so I did have that. And I have some passenger equipment and things like that, but generally speaking, that's what we're doing with the train. Recently, I have begun to do first-person interpretation of a Union General, Major General E.O.C. Ord, who was commander of the Army of the James at the very end of the war, saw significant action out in the Western Theater under Grant and early in the war. He has become sort of a passion. At this point in my life, I like going out and doing the lectures and talking in the first person. Really not spry enough, let's say, to go out there and go running across the fields down in Bentonville or Battle of Bentonville. My great-grandfather was actually at Bentonville. He was with Sherman. My great-grandfather was in the 150th New York. Mm-hmm. And that regiment saw its first combat at Gettysburg, came down to Brandy Station, was picketed at Beverly Ford. They got orders to board trains. And the next thing he knew, he was in the Army of the Cumberland. And he ended up under Sherman and made the march down to Atlanta, Fort Arasaka and Dallas and all those little places in between. Made the march to the sea, was one of the first occupiers into Savannah, as the family story goes. And there are some references in some diaries of people from his unit participating in the burning of the state capitol building at Columbia, South Carolina. But as I always tell people, we don't have anybody's candlesticks or anything. I don't know anything. So, all right. But then he ended up at Bentonville. He saw action right up to the end of the war. And in fact, he was camped right outside of Durham when Johnston surrendered to Sherman. He marched in the Grand Review on the second day in Washington, D.C. A little bit proud of that fact that he was part of the Grand Review.
You should be. Now, I do know that you are a lineal member of the SUVCW. Mm-hmm. Is that particular gentleman the gentleman who you were right. Was your primary ancestor?
Yes, and his name is Richard Martin Lown. And Richard Martin Lown, His mother was, her name was Vidalia Berenger. These are Germans. They were They were immigrants in the late 17s and or late 18th century, early 19th century is when these people started coming over. My ancestry is interesting. I'm descended from Palatine Germans who came over here around 1710 as part of business venture by the then governor of New York, a man by the name of Hunter. And Governor Hunter, the royal governor, brought 5,000 Germans over to work in the pine forests of New York. His idea was that they would make naval stores, that they would take these trees, turn them into pitch, create various naval stores, and that he would get wealthy. Turns out that pine trees in New York are a lot different than pine trees in South Carolina, and they don't make very good pitch. And so Governor Hunter went broke, and he had to sell off his holdings. And my ancestors ended up working for the Livingstons. And so they lived in, some of my ancestors lived on in 6 different little communities that were established on the east and west bank of the Hudson River, about 115, 120 miles north of New York City. One was called the East Camp, makes sense, and the other was the West Camp.
Keep it easy.
Today, the East Camp is called Germantown,
Okay.
and the West Camp is called Hurley. But these people came in. That's one side of that's my mother's side of the family. They were strict Calvinists, and they became Dutch Reformed. They're all buried in a little graveyard next to a little church that's been standing there since about 1740. Some of them are buried, most of them are buried there, some of them are buried in other areas. But I also have descend from people who came to Connecticut. I have a Whitney line, and some of my earliest relatives came into New Haven and helped establish the city, the colony there in New Haven. In fact, one of my ancestors, I'm working on tracing that out now to make sure that it's all correct, but one of my ancestors was involved, was a leading citizen and was involved in the Pequot War.
Okay.
And actually was killed by the Pequots. And there's supposedly a monument to him in New Haven. And so kind of working on that now. That would have been about 1630s that these people came over. You know, the family's been here a long time. Of course, we participated in every thing from the Pequot War all the way up through the wars with the French in the 1710s, 1711, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, and then, of course, French and Indian War, and then, of course, the Revolutionary War. I have an ancestor, Heinrich Kuhn, spelled with a K, K-U-H-N, Heinrich Henry. He served in New York in a militia unit and was involved in Oriskany, the battle of Oriskany under Herkimer. So there's a lot of history there all through our time. Our family has always saw fit to do its duty for the country.
Outstanding. Do you have any other relatives or ancestors that fought during the Civil War that you'd like to mention?
Well, I have an ancestor. His name was Christian Guntler Jr. Now, Christian and his father, Christian Guntler Sr., both belonged to the 20th New York Militia, National Guard, before the war. I assume that they had both come over in the 1840s, German immigrants again. So they were not early rivals. These are people that are coming over about 1840, 1842. They belonged to this militia unit. Both of them went off to the war, 90 days, the 75,000 for 90-day deal. Mm-hmm. And New York needed to fill its quota. So they sent off their militia units. Christian Sr. never participated in a battle. Christian Sr. Ended up, he was an older man. He ended up getting what they call dropsy, which is a liver disease. And he was sent home. And he died shortly after returning home. Christian Jr., he ended up participating in the Second Battle of Manassas as part of the 80th New York in the railroad cut.
Okay.
He was mortally wounded. He had the lower portion of his face blown off by a musket ball. He, of course, couldn't eat or do anything. He languished in a hospital in Chantilly, which is where Ox Hill is, which is interesting because that's where F.L. Kearney died the next day. But he languished there for a couple of days and died a rather miserable death. He is also buried in what we call the old Dutch Red Church. Christian Sr. and Christian Jr. are both buried there side by side. I have an ancestor who married a man. I have a great-great aunt who married a man by the name of Samuel Jack. And Sam Jack's an interesting study in things. Sam was about 13 or 14. He decided he wanted to join up. So he joined up, and he ended up being in a heavy artillery unit that was stationed outside of Washington, D.C. in one of the forts. I can't remember which one at this time. At any rate, he got the measles, and they had to take him to the hospital. And when they got him to the hospital, they found out that his testicles had not descended. And they realized that he was too young to be in the Army. Mm-hmm. And so he was discharged honorably, and believe it or not, was a member of the Grand Army of the Republic. He had an honorable discharge. He joined the Grand Army. So, and there are others, I'm sure, that I haven't researched. My region produced the 150th New York, the 126th New York, the 56th New York, and the 120th New York, the 80th New York. It's just an area that was very patriotic. And again, most of these people are either German or Irish, mm-hmm. and they're going off to this war, and they're very patriotic fellows. Right. And my grandfather, Richard, my great-great-grandfather, Richard Lown, he joined September of 1862 as soon as he could. That was the earliest he could. He was 18. He saw the war all the way through and was discharged in July of 65, mustered out, and walked. I always tell people, my great-great-grandfather walked from Chattanooga all the way to Atlanta, and from Atlanta all the way to Savannah, and from Savannah all the way to Durham. And he did the grand tour of the South the hard way.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I hear a lot of stories like that. It just seems like the buses weren't running on time. Yeah. But I had somebody put together a mileage chart on their relative, and I believe he said that their relative had marched over 3,000 miles.
Oh, I can imagine that that's definitely true. Absolutely. I wouldn't want to think about how many times they had resold their shoes to make to do all of this. But they were tougher people than we are. I think they were much tougher people. I have only a picture of my great-great-grandfather when he was my age. Mm-hmm. He was a thin, wiry dude. He looked pretty tough, even in his old age. He came down with all kinds of rheumatisms, and he had all kinds of problems with his bones. He had a hard time getting his pension because just like today, you filed with the State Department or whatever it was back then, and just like the VA, I got the pack of paper about that thick of his applications that he had in affidavits and on and on and on and on, so that he could get a $20 pension.
It was a lot of money back then.
Yes, it was.
And in some cases, it was the difference between survival and not surviving.
Yeah, and well, he is buried in a little place called Berrytown, New York. It's what we affectionately in New York call a hamlet. Um, it's about maybe about 6 miles from Red Hook, where we mostly live, and right down by the river, right down by the Hudson River. He and his wife are buried there, along with several of his brothers, who are also buried in St. John's Episcopal Church in Berrytown, New York.